The chamber lights dimmed just enough to turn the polished metal floor into a faint mirror, reflecting the countless colors of the Galactic Council's gathered species. Every seat was filled scaled envoys wrapped in ceremonial cloth. Crystalline delegates who hummed when they moved, feathered representatives blinking in the low gravity. An audience of 1,000 worlds. All waiting for one thing: the arrival of the first human ever invited to speak before them. Most expected something predictable. Another careful diplomatic performance. Another quiet pledge of cooperation. Another soft-spoken testament to humanity's eagerness to join the galactic family. They'd heard those lines from every young species that had clawed its way into the stars. The Council's translators were already preloaded with phrases they assumed would be used. We come in peace. We hope to collaborate. We seek guidance. Those were the traditions. That was the script. But humanity had never been very fond of scripts. Whispers drifted around the chamber like static. Some envoys exchanged nervous glances. Others simply waited, confident in the predictability of newcomers. Humanity wasn't especially powerful, yet certainly not compared to the ancient empires sitting in the front row. But there was a curiosity about them, a restlessness in the data streams that the older species didn't quite understand. Human signals music, debates, speeches, laughter had poured into the galaxy like a flood. They were loud, emotional, full of contradictions, and impossible to categorize. That unpredictability fascinated the Council, even if they'd never admit it. Then the doors opened. The human diplomat stepped inside calm posture. Steady breath, eyes taking in everything without flinching. No honor guards. No hovering entourage. Just one figure in a plain suit, walking forward as if entering a small meeting room rather than the most powerful political body in known space. The murmurs grew louder, confused by the simplicity of their presence. Many species relied on grand displays to communicate status. Humans seemed comfortable without any. When the diplomat reached the center podium, the room fell quiet. 1,000 eyes, lenses, and sensory organs fixed on the single human. The air felt charged, as if every species was holding its breath. This was supposed to be a routine negotiation and agreement to place. Earth under Council's supervision during its early years in space. A safe process. A predictable formality. But the moment the diplomat's hand rested lightly on the controls, something shifted. Their voice, calm but firm, echoed through the chamber. Members of the Galactic Council, they began. Thank you for inviting humanity here. We appreciate the effort it took to make this meeting possible. Pleasantries, expected, normal. But then the tone changed. Not louder, just sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. However, the diplomat continued. I must decline the negotiation proposal you have prepared for us. Gasps rippled across the room. Some species let out startled chirps, others twitched bioluminescent patterns of disbelief. Declining. That wasn't how this worked. Young species didn't decline anything. They accepted guidance, oversight, and the long list of rules that kept the galaxy stable. They certainly didn't walk into the council chamber and reject the terms before the discussion even began. The council's chair and elder, being with a voice like rolling, graveling forward. Human representative, they said slowly. Perhaps your translator has erred. You wish to negotiate alternative terms, yes? No, the diplomat replied. I'm not negotiating. Silence struck the room like a drop into deep water, quiet at first, then spreading outward, rippling tension into every corner. It wasn't what the diplomat said. It was how they said it, calm, steady, as if refusing one of the galaxy's most established traditions was simply reasonable. Humans were still new to interstellar flight. Their ships were barely capable of reaching the nearest systems without refueling. Their homeworld was not protected by any ancient fleets or cosmic pacts. The Council could overwhelm Earth with political pressure or if they ever chose to break their own laws force. Yet the humans standing before them seemed unafraid. The Diplomat continued. Humanity is grateful for the opportunity to join this community, but we cannot accept the terms of dependency. We won't operate under a framework that limits our choices before we've even learned what those choices truly are. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Independence wasn't unheard of, but rejecting oversight outright was dangerous. The Council's system existed for a reason. Young species often made mistakes, reckless experiments, unstable alliances, conflicts that spilled across borders. The regulations protected everyone. Surely the humans didn't understand the implications, but the Diplomat went on. Voice steady, carrying a confidence that felt out of place for such a young species. We are willing to collaborate, to learn, and to contribute. But not as a supervised civilization. Not as a species placed into the lowest tier of authority. Humanity refuses to sign any agreement that restricts our development before we've even had a chance to show who we are. This wasn't negotiation. It was a declaration. Whispers rose against, some worried, some intrigued. The older species, the ones who had seen empires rise and fall, exchanged long glances. They had studied humans more closely than most. They'd seen footage of human debates, protests, discoveries, disasters, recoveries. They'd observed the strange way humans united under pressure. How they argued fiercely with each other, yet stood together when it mattered. A contradiction, yes, but a powerful one. Still, no one expected this. A delegate with iridescent wings gave a sharp trill. Your species has only just entered the galactic network, they said. You lack the infrastructure to operate without guidance. Why reject aid? The Diplomat didn't hesitate. Because we know what guided dependence becomes. We know how easily help turns into control. We've seen it in our own history more times than we can count. A murmur of interest spread among the observers who studied socio-political development. Humans, even in their earliest transmissions, had displayed a remarkable awareness of power structures. To hear it stated openly in the council chamber was bold, almost too bold. And what? The council chair asked slowly, "Does humanity propose instead?" For the first time, the Diplomat paused. Their eyes moved across the sea of alien faces, studying the reaction sphere: surprise, irritation, curiosity. Then they spoke. "We propose that humanity be recognized as a fully independent member species from the start. No supervision tier. No development restrictions. We will abide by common laws, of course, but we will not accept a role that labels us as incapable before we have even begun." The chamber erupted, voices rising in dozens of languages, translators struggling to keep up. Some called it impossible. Others called it reckless. A few, surprisingly, called it admirable. Independent membership without a probation period was unprecedented. The council had existed for thousands of years, and not once had a newcomer demanded equal footing immediately. The chair tried to restore order, but the room's frustration surged like a wave. "Human representative," they said sternly, "you must understand the magnitude of what you are asking. To grant such a request would disrupt protocols older than your civilization's written history." "I understand that," the Diplomat said quietly. "And I also understand that every protocol exists because someone, somewhere, once challenged what came before. Humanity isn't here to take a seat that someone assigns us. We're here to build our own." A hush fell again. Not peaceful, charged, tense, full of edges. The human wasn't threatening anyone. They weren't demanding power or territory or special treatment. They were simply refusing to be small. Refusing to let the galaxy decide who they were before they could define themselves. Across the room, a few ancient delegates exchanged unreadable glances. The kind that suggested they had seen the spark of something before something rare. Unpredictable, and dangerously capable of reshaping the balance of power. The chair spoke slowly, cautiously. Your request is not impossible, but it would require unanimous approval from every member of this council. A wave of reaction surged against shock, disbelief. Unanimous approval had never been achieved for anything involving a new species. Not once. Not for any world, any civilization, no matter how promising. And yet the human diplomat nodded. Then let the council decide. Humanity is prepared to accept the consequences of our choice. A long silence settled over the chamber. A silence full of tension, hidden calculations, and the first flickers of something no one had expected. Intrigue. The chair finally turned toward the assembly. Very well. The vote will proceed. But understand this: if even one voice objects, your request fails, and Earth will be required to enter the supervised alignment process. The diplomat held their gaze unblinking. Understood. A soft metallic chime rang through the chamber, signaling the beginning of the vote. Lights shifted, panels activated. Representatives leaned forward. 1,000 decisions were now moments away. The humans stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful species in the galaxy, waiting for a judgment that could shape their entire future. The air seemed to tremble as the first vote illuminated on the council. Display, it was impossible to tell whether the lights meant support or rejection. Impossible to know how the rest would fall. And as the second vote flickered into existence, no one in the chamber, not even the human, could predict what would happen next. The second vote glowed on the towering display, a faint pulse of color, impossible to interpret at a glance. The human diplomat didn't look away from it, but they didn't let their emotions show either. They stood anchored in the center of the chamber, steady as a stone in a storm. Even as whispers spread through the rows like wildfire, the council chamber always felt large, but tonight it felt enormous, as if the space itself were stretching to hold the weight of each opinion forming behind alien eyes. Some delegates exchanged tight-clipped gestures. Others sat motionless, studying the human with unreadable expressions. Every species seemed to be calculating something, and humanity, still so new, still so small, was suddenly the center of 1,000 silent equations. Yet beneath all of that, another current ran: curiosity. Even the oldest civilizations, the ones whose histories extended back farther than humanity's earliest writing, leaned forward with interest. They wanted to know why humans were so different. Why they dared to do what no one had ever attempted. Why they refused to follow a path that every young species before them had accepted without question. But humanity hadn't shown up out of arrogance. There was history behind this moment, centuries of it. And while the council saw only the diplomat standing before them, behind that figure stood an entire world with its own struggles and scars. The diplomat's presence here had roots that reached far deeper than the council understood. It began long before Earth ever made contact with another intelligent species, before faster-than-light travel, before the discovery of the first alien signal. Humanity had carried a complicated past, fractured alliances, bitter conflicts, desperate recoveries, and a stubborn resilience that wouldn't die even when things fell apart. They had rebuilt themselves more times than they liked to admit. Every collapse had pushed them to stand back up. Every challenge had taught them not to place their fate entirely in someone else's hands. That thinking shaped the diplomats standing in the chamber today, back on Earth. They had been chosen not because they spoke softly or followed rules perfectly, but because they understood humanity's fears and hopes. They knew how fragile new freedom could be, and they knew how easily a powerful alliance, even one with good intentions, could influence a young civilization. Earth had avoided countless pitfalls in its recent history by questioning authority, by refusing to accept the way things are, as UNCHANGEABLE. And now all of that experience had brought humanity to this exact moment. This quiet standoff in a chamber filled with civilizations older and stronger than anything humans had ever faced. The council display flickered again as the third vote appeared. Still unclear, still unreadable. The diplomat inhaled slowly. They didn't turn around. They didn't seek reactions. But they were aware of how tense the room felt, how alive the air seemed. Even without looking, they could sense the mixed emotions radiating from the rows of delegates. Some species shifted in nervous patterns. Some glowed faintly, colors rippling with worry. Others clicked or murmured among themselves. Behind the diplomat, the human observers seated near the rear of the chamber exchanged glances. They weren't diplomats, just scientists, cultural analysts, and technical staff who had come to witness history. Each of them knew how risky this was. None of them had imagined their representative would stand before the most powerful body in the galaxy and reject the foundational agreement presented to every new species. But none of them looked away now. They were nervous. Yes, but also proud, because this felt like the most human thing possible. The diplomat finally spoke again, their voice soft but carrying across the entire chamber. For clarity, they said, our request is not meant to challenge the Council's authority. We simply want the chance to grow without predetermined limits. The chair turned toward them, studying their expression carefully. You understand that unsupervised development comes with tremendous responsibility. Mistakes made at this stage can affect entire sectors. We understand responsibility, the diplomat replied. And we also understand that restraint can be learned only through experience, not through restriction. A low rumble of disagreement echoed from one corner of the chamber. A delegate with dark, plaited skin tapped its clawed fingers on the edge of its platform. Experience leads to instability. We have seen this countless times. Control is order. Restriction is safety. For whom? The diplomat asked softly. Those two words hung in the air like a spark near dry grass. It wasn't aggression, it was honesty. And honesty could be more unsettling than any threat. The plated delegate stiffened. A few others shifted uneasily, not because the human was wrong, but because the question forced them to consider something they preferred not to. Whether the rules truly protected young species, or whether they protected the Council from dealing with the consequences of those species growing too quickly. The fourth vote appeared. Still no clarity. Still no indication of support or rejection. Back on Earth, millions watched through delayed broadcasts. They couldn't hear every detail, but they saw the posture of their representative, saw the confidence, and felt a strange mix of hope and dread. Social feeds exploded with analysis. Some praised the bold stance. Others feared retaliation. Others simply held their breath, waiting for news. The diplomat, of course, couldn't think about any of that right now. They had a different pressure weighing on them. Humanity's request wasn't just unusual, it bordered on unprecedented ambition. Equal status among the Council's established species meant access to trade, to research, two-star routes that were normally restricted for centuries. It meant political weight far beyond what humans should have had at this stage. And although the diplomat knew the request might fail, they also knew something else. Humanity didn't need instant power. They just needed a fair chance. The vote display blinked again. A fifth symbol appeared. The room grew even quieter. Some delegates leaned forward. Others sat motionless as statues. A few whispered through private communication channels. The air was heavy. The energy was tense. And then the chair asked a question no one expected. "Human representative," they said. "Your species has risen quickly, but you are still new to the realities of interstellar politics. Why does independence matter to you this much?" The diplomat didn't answer immediately. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they understood the importance of the moment. The room waited. The silence stretched. Even the delegates who had spoken against humanity earlier seemed curious. Finally, the diplomat spoke. Because our history taught us that progress made under someone else's control is not true progress. Every time humanity has grown, it has been because we were allowed to think differently, act differently, and challenge the systems around us. If we give up that freedom now, the very beginning, we risk losing the very thing that makes us who we are. The chamber reacted not with noise, but with stillness. A deeper, more thoughtful silence. Some delegates had lived through the collapse of their own early empires, seen their worlds rebuilt under strict guidance, watched their freedoms controlled for the sake of order. For them, the humans' words stirred something old, something uncomfortable. Others, whose civilizations had always been stable and carefully regulated, looked confused. They couldn't understand why humans valued uncertainty so much. A few, the oldest ones, the ones who had seen bold species rise from nothing, simply watched with quiet recognition. The sixth vote appeared still unclear. The diplomat finally allowed themselves a small breath. Not relief, just a reminder they were still grounded, still aware, still present. They glanced upward, toward the high windows, showing streaks of distant stars. Out there was humanity's uncertain future, dangerous, open. And down here, in this chamber, the first step toward that future was being decided by beings who barely knew them. But that was how new eras always began. Another vote blinked into existence. The seventh, still no pattern. Still no hint. Behind the diplomat, one of the human observers, an older scientist with tired eyes, closed their hands together tightly. They whispered under their breath, not a prayer, but a hope that all of this wouldn't end in the worst possible way, because the truth was simple. If the Council rejected humanity's request, Earth would have no choice but to accept supervised development, a system that could last generations, a system that could slow their expansion, limit their influence, and shape every future decision. And if humanity still refused the terms after that, no one wanted to imagine that outcome. The eighth vote flickered into life. The diplomat remained still. The room felt as if it were holding its breath. And then, suddenly, one of the delegates in the front row raised a hand. This was unexpected interruption during a vote cycle was extremely rare. The chair hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The delegates stood. They were tall, with a shimmering form that shifted like liquid metal. When they spoke, their voice sounded like several tones layered together. "I wish to address the human," they said. The entire chamber leaned closer. The diplomat lifted their chin slightly. "I'm listening." The delegates studied them with slow, deliberate focus. "Your species is unpredictable, emotional, rapidly developing. And your request risks instability. Why should we believe your independence will not become a threat to the balance of this galaxy?" The 10th vote glowed brighter than the others, a slow pulse that made the chamber's shadows shift. The human diplomat felt the temperature of the room change, not physically, but in the way the attention tightened, as if every mind present had leaned closer at the same time. There was no readable pattern to the votes, no clue as to which species had supported humanity's request or which had rejected it. The display only showed symbols, and the meaning behind each symbol remained locked until the full count was done. Still, something about that 10th light felt different. It carried a weight the others hadn't. Maybe it was just tension growing with each passing moment. Or maybe it meant something else. The diplomat didn't let the thought distract them. They kept their posture steady, eyes forward, even as whispers worked their way through the chamber like thin cracks spreading across glass. Some delegates spoke in hushed tones about risk. Others murmured about opportunity. A few didn't whisper at all. they simply watched the human with a kind of curious caution, as though trying to understand why a species so young dared to stand so straight. The next vote blinked on. The 11th behind the Diplomat, the team of human observers waited anxiously. One of them, a communications specialist, leaned toward another. "If this goes badly," she whispered, "do you think they'll restrict our broadcasts? Cut off our open channels?" "No," the man beside her whispered back. "They won't silence us. They'll just make sure no one listens." That possibility wasn't violent or dramatic, but it was chilling. Isolation could be just as dangerous as conflict. Being ignored by the galaxy might have been safer than hostile attention, but it would crush humanity's momentum all the same. While the votes continued, the Diplomat's thoughts drifted briefly to the days leading up to this moment. The meetings back on Earth, the late-night arguments, the tension in the committee room when the idea of demanding independence was first proposed. Many had called the plan reckless, too bold, too early, but the Diplomat remembered standing at the window of the launch platform, staring down at the lights of the city sprawling beneath them. Humanity had come so far. They had crossed the threshold into the wider galaxy, carrying not weapons or conquest, but curiosity, creativity, and stubborn determination. Accepting supervised development would have dimmed that spark. It would have handed over the reins of humanity's future before they had even settled into their own seat at the table. They couldn't let that happen. A soft tone rang across the chamber, pulling the Diplomat back to the present as the 12th vote appeared. The chair shifted slightly, folding their hands as though preparing for the long debate that would follow, no matter how the vote turned. But before the 13th vote could appear, another interruption came. This time from the upper seating ring, where younger, mid-strength civilizations often sat species that were neither ancient nor new. Developed but not dominant, a delegate with bright, shifting patterns across their skin rose and spoke without waiting for permission. "We need to discuss something before this vote continues," they said, their voice surprisingly steady. "If the humans are asking for equality, we must consider what equality would demand of them." The chair frowned, clearly annoyed. "This interruption is irregular. The vote cycle has already begun. It won't matter if the cycle finishes without understanding," the delegate insisted. "We're voting on the future of an entire civilization. We should at least clarify what we expect from them if they are granted independence." A low rumble of agreement came from several rows. The chair finally nodded. "Very well, speak." The delegate turned their gaze toward the Diplomat, patterns of light rippling across their skin in thoughtful waves. "Human," they said, "your species is quick to adapt, quick to challenge. But equality in this council is not just title or permission. It comes with responsibility. If you take a seat as equals, other species will expect you to contribute, to mediate disputes, to provide aid, to stand by your decisions even when the consequences ripple outward." The Diplomat nodded slowly. "We understand. Do you?" The delegate pressed. "You may be prepared to manage your own growth, but are you prepared to take responsibility for how your actions affect others? Equal standing means equal burden." The words were fair, maybe, even supportive, but they carried a subtle test underneath. The Diplomat let the tension settle before answering. "We don't seek independence to avoid responsibility. We seek it because we want our responsibilities to be real. If we accept supervised development, every decision we make can be overridden. Every risk we take can be labeled a mistake before we even understand it. True accountability requires freedom. Without that, we're only shadows acting under someone else's light." A few delegates blinked in surprise. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The concept struck differently depending on the species. Some were raised in cultures where independent judgment was essential. Others came from systems built entirely on collective control, Another delegate rose, not supportive this time. Their form was small, but their presence was sharp. "Your people are unpredictable," they said. "You fight among yourselves. You shift beliefs in decades, not centuries. You build fast, break fast, rebuild even faster. What happens when your rapid changes destabilize those around you?" The diplomat didn't flinch. "Then we will face the consequences and learn from them. We don't deny our flaws, but we don't want them managed for us." The small delegate's eyes narrowed. "Your confidence is either admirable or dangerous." "Maybe both," the diplomat replied softly. The chamber reacted with a mix of amusement and discomfort. No one expected a human to answer with such honesty. The 13th vote finally illuminated, cutting through the atmosphere like a sudden note in a quiet room, still unreadable. But something had changed. The debate was no longer between humans and the council. It was unfolding among the delegates themselves. Discussions broke out in clusters, some defending humanity's stance, others condemning it as irresponsible. A few saw opportunity in a new independent species. Others feared disruption of the delicate balance that had held for so long. Even the ancient delegates, the ones who rarely spoke, were now murmuring in private channels. The diplomat remained silent, letting the room shift and argue. Their role wasn't to control this part. Their role was simply to stand firm. Meanwhile, in the lower seating ring, two younger species whispered anxiously. One spoke with soft clicks. "If the humans get equal status so soon, what does that mean for the rest of us?" "Possibility," the other replied. "If they succeed, maybe we can push for more autonomy. And if they fail, then the council will tighten rules even more." Their quiet worry echoed the thoughts of many species. The vote wasn't only about humans, it was about the stability of every developing world. The 14th vote appeared. Then the 15th. Still no pattern. Still no clarity. The tension stretched so thin the room felt frozen. And then another voice rose, this time from one of the oldest seats in the chamber. A delegate whose species had survived forgotten empires, celestial disasters, and ages of political storms. "We have seen impulsive species rise and fall," they said slowly. "We have seen careful ones fade away. Balance is not created by rules. It is created by growth. Growth is rarely gentle." The entire chamber fell silent. The elder delegate leaned back in their seat, gazing at the human. "The question before us is not whether humanity is ready for equality. It is whether the council is ready for the change they will bring." A ripple of unease spread through the room. The 16th vote flickered into existence. Then the 17th, and still the display offered no indication of the outcome. But every new pulse of light seemed heavier, sharper, more electric. The human diplomat finally allowed themselves a slow breath, knowing the vote was nearing its end. And as the 18th symbol brightened across the towering screen, the chamber grew so quiet it felt as if the entire galaxy were listening, waiting for the moment when everything would shift one way or the other. The 19th vote appeared. Then the 20th, and the next sound was not a voice, but a soft, resonant chime that echoed through the chamber, signaling that only a handful of votes remained before the fate of humanity and the council would be decided. The soft, resonant chime lingered in the air long after it faded, as if the walls themselves were holding on to the sound. The human diplomat felt the vibrations settle in their bones. The vote was nearing its final stage now. Only a few symbols remained, each one carrying the weight of entire star systems, each one capable of shifting the future of humanity with a single flicker of light. The chamber had grown impossibly quiet. Even the delegates, whose species communicated through constant, gentle hums, seemed to force themselves into stillness. Only the distant hum of the atmospheric regulators broke the silence, and even that felt softer, like the machinery was afraid to interrupt. the 21st vote blinked into existence. The display tower glowed with its strange pattern of symbols, unreadable to all until the final count. Still, delegates watched it as if staring long enough might reveal the answer. Some leaned forward in anticipation. Others sank back into their seats, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, calculating everything from trade routes to political influence to long-term implications of a young species gaining independence far too early. The Diplomat didn't move. Their hands rested lightly at their sides, fingers relaxed, shoulders straight, breath steady. But inside, there was a storm, years of preparation and thought and hope colliding with the pressure of this moment. They knew what was at stake: humanity's future, Earth's freedom, the chance to grow without being boxed in by fear or tradition. They also knew this wasn't a conflict that could be settled with strength or technology. This was about belief, conviction, trust, and trust was the rarest currency in the galaxy. The 22nd vote appeared, flickering slightly as if the system itself hesitated before recording it. A murmur rose from the fifth seating ring. One delegate with two shimmering tendrils spoke softly to the one beside them. "If they succeed," they whispered, "everything changes. And if they fail?" The other replied, "Everything stays the same." The first murmured, "And maybe that's the problem." A few rows away, members of a more cautious species watched the humans with worry etched across their patterned skin. "They are too bold," one whispered. Boldness leads to instability, but sometimes instability is needed to break stagnation, another countered. "The Council hasn't changed its procedures in thousands of cycles." Exactly, and it shouldn't start with them. The Diplomat heard none of this directly, but they could feel the shifting energy in the chamber. The debate had grown beyond them now. The Council wasn't just voting on humanity. They were debating their own future, their own systems, their own fears. The 23rd vote lit up. The tension grew thicker, almost physical. Even the atmospheric tension readings displayed on the edges of the chamber subtly shifted as hundreds of delegates held their breath longer than usual. Every species present, ancient or young, felt the pull of the moment. The chair watched the Diplomat carefully. Their expression was carved into an unreadable shape, something between caution and curiosity. They had presided over countless meetings, countless votes, countless conflicts. But they had never presided over one like this. This wasn't routine. This wasn't predictable. This was the kind of moment that left marks on history. The 24th vote glowed into view. Then the translator system, which had been silent except for occasional automatic voice outputs, suddenly flickered. A slight distortion buzzed through the chamber before stabilizing again. A few delegates exchanged glances. Small technical problems didn't happen often. Not here, not during votes. One of the human observers tensed. "Is that normal?" she whispered. "No," another answered. "But it doesn't mean interference. Could just be strain on the system." Or a sign the Council didn't expect this level of stress today. The Diplomat remained still, but they noticed. A glitch, tiny, harmless, but significant in its timing. Even the Council's systems were feeling the pressure. The 25th vote brightened, casting a pale shimmer across the chamber. Only a small number of votes remained now. The chamber felt like a tuning string pulled so tight it was one breath away from snapping. Delegates shifted, repositioned themselves, adjusted translation devices, straightened postural, subtle signs of building tension. The Diplomat's eyes flicked briefly to the human observers. They saw determination, their hope, worry, pride, fear, all mixed into the same expression. It reminded the Diplomat why they stood here, why they had taken this risk, not to defy the galaxy, but to ensure humanity's future was written by humanity. The 26th vote appeared. The glow felt heavier now, as if the symbols themselves knew what they were part of. Conversations started again, quiet, tense, full of unspoken questions. A delegate from a cautious aquatic species raised their voice. "Human representative," they said softly, "what happens if you are granted independence and then fail? What happens if your species makes choices that lead to disaster? Not only for yourselves, but for others." The diplomat turned their heads slightly, meeting their gaze. "Then we will face those consequences. That is part of independence. And what of the species caught in the fallout?" "We will take responsibility," the diplomat replied. "We will not hide behind excuses or blame others for what we choose. We don't want freedom without accountability." The aquatic delegate hesitated. Their fins trembled slightly, a sign of deep thought or worry. "Many young worlds have said the same," they murmured, and later begged for guidance. The diplomat nodded slowly. "Maybe humans will too. But if that day ever comes, we want to ask for help as equals, not as children." That answer sent another ripple. Through the chamber, the 27th vote pulsed onto the display. A low thrum built under the flora sign of the orbital station, adjusting its power balancing. The chamber lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, then steadied again. It was barely noticeable, but in this moment, nothing went unnoticed. One of the oldest delegates raised a hand. "Human," they said quietly, "your words show confidence. But confidence is easily shaken. If this vote fails, if you are placed under supervision, despite your request, well, you accept the Council's authority." The diplomat paused, not because they didn't know the answer, but because they understood the risk of saying it aloud. Slowly, firmly, they replied, "We will follow the rules, but we will not stop striving for more." The ancient delegate's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something closer to respect. Or maybe recognition. "Honest," they murmured. "Dangerously honest." The 28th vote lit up, brighter than the rest. Gasps spread through the room, not because the vote meant anything specific, but because the light had flared. A glitch or a symbolic moment the system had not expected. The translator announced calmly, "Vote 28 recorded." The chamber fell silent again. Only 2 votes remained, and with each heartbeat, suspense tightened like a cord. The tension wasn't only human anymore. It spread across species, across rows, across generations of tradition. The diplomat felt the air shift as the 29th vote flickered into existence. Slower this time, as if the system itself hesitated. The symbol glowed for several seconds before stabilizing, then a deep, resonant hum traveled through the floor. The final vote was being processed. The room froze. Every eye, lens, sensor, and organic vision source locked onto the display. The air felt thick, charged, almost electric. The diplomat's heart beat once, twice, 3 times, louder than anything else. The human observers leaned forward. Several delegates sat on the edge of their seats, breath held, tension visible across their bodies. The towering display flickered once, twice, the final vote. Symbol began to form slowly, deliberately, each line and curve appearing. One fraction at a time. No one dared speak. No one even moved. And just before the final symbol completed, the entire chamber lights dimmed, plunging the room into a hushed twilight glow. A collective, stunned breath filled the space. Whatever was about to appear on that display was going to change everything. For a moment, it felt as if the universe itself waited. The final symbol on the display hovered incomplete. Lines of light suspended in the dim air. Delegates leaned forward. The human diplomat stood motionless. Every thought, every fear, every hope hung in that unfinished shape. Then the chamber light steadied again, slowly rising from the brief dimming. A soft pulse traveled through the floor as the council systems corrected themselves. The hovering lines of the final vote quivered, brightened, and locked into place. A sound rose through the chamber. Not applause. Not shock. More like a ripple of stunned exhale, thousands of beings letting out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. The human diplomat's eyes moved across the display as the symbols rearranged themselves into the final verdict, each glowing mark shifting into a pattern that the translator could interpret. A calm voice filled the chamber. Result: unanimous approval. For a heartbeat. The room didn't move at all. Then emotions surged through it like a wave. Some delegates gasped, others murmured in disbelief. A few, those who had remained silent through most of the discussions, lowered their heads in quiet acceptance. Others exchanged complicated glances, mixtures of concern and admiration. Even the ancient delegates, normally unshakable, showed faint expressions of surprise. Unanimous approval. A vote that had never been achieved in the Council's long history. A vote that granted humanity full, independent status, equal footing. Full rights, full responsibility from the very beginning. The diplomat let out a slow breath, steady but deep. They didn't smile. They didn't celebrate. They simply absorbed the moment, letting its weight settle inside them. The gravity of it was immense. But so was the opportunity. The chair rose, their voice resonating in the chamber with more strength than before. Human representative. The Council has spoken. Your species is now recognized as an independent member civilization. You will not be placed under supervised development. You will hold full rights and full obligations. The diplomat nodded with quiet respect. We accept the responsibility. The chair studied them for several seconds. See that your species remembers what today means. That your path is now your own end. That consequences follow both courage and carelessness. We understand, the diplomat said. Behind them, the human observers struggled to remain composed. One pressed their hands over their mouth, eyes shining. Another shook their head in disbelief, whispering, "We actually did it." A third simply stared forward, stunned, trying to take in the scale of what had just happened. A younger delegate rose from their platform, voice warm but cautious. Humanity has earned a place among us, but we hope you will stay open to learning. Independence does not mean isolation. The diplomat nodded. We don't seek to distance ourselves. We want to grow with the galaxy, not under it. A ripple of approval swept across the room. The liquid metal delegate, the one who had questioned humanity's potential threat earlier, stood as well. Their shifting form reflected the chamber lights in hundreds of gleaming colors. Boldness alone didn't win this vote, they said. It was honesty. And honesty is rare in these halls. Cherish that. We will, the diplomat replied. Slowly, the tension in the chamber eased. Delegates began to gather their belongings, sending messages to their homeworlds, discussing the new political landscape. Some approached each other to quietly reassess alliances. Others moved to speak with the humans, offering tentative introductions or curious questions, for the first time since entering the chamber. The diplomat allowed a small smile to surface, not a victory, more like relief, and maybe a touch of awe. Humanity had just stepped into the galaxy with a voice equal to civilizations that had existed for millennia. As they turned to leave the central podium, a delegate from a soft-spoken species approached with a gentle tone. "Human," they said, "what will your people do now?" The diplomat thought carefully before answering. "We go home and tell our world that the future is ours to build." Those words carried farther than they meant to. Several delegates paused mid-step, taking in the meaning. It was a simple answer, but it told the story of every young civilization that had ever dreamed of more. One of the human observers joined the diplomat as they walked across the chamber toward the exit corridor. "Do you realize what this means?" They whispered. "Yes," the diplomat said. But their tone held a quiet seriousness. "It means the hard part starts now. Because independence wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. The corridor outside the chamber was quieter than expected. A few council staff members moved about, giving respectful nods to the humans. Some paused, watching the diplomat with expressions that ranged from admiration to curiosity to cautious uncertainty. The diplomat looked out one of the long observation windows as they walked. The stars outside shimmered against the black stretch of space, each point of light representing a system, a world, a people. Humanity was now part of all of it, not as a protected civilization, not as a supervised world, but as an equal participant. One of the human observers exhaled softly beside them. "This changes everything." "It does," the diplomat said. "But we can't forget why we fought for this. Independence isn't about pride. It's about responsibility. It's about shaping our own path. And what path is that?" the observer asked. The diplomat studied the stars for a moment before answering. "One where we don't let fear define us. One where we learn from others on our own terms. One where humanity grows without losing the things that make us human." They continued down the corridor, passing by a tall display showing the council's updated roster. And for the first time in history, a new name glowed among the established icons. Humanity Independent Members Civilizations. Seeing those words sent a quiet shiver through the diplomat. It felt unreal and monumental at the same time. Later, back aboard the human diplomatic shuttle, the diplomat finally allowed themselves to sit. The engines hummed with a gentle vibration, a comfortable reminder of home-built craftsmanship. The ship was small compared to most council vessels, but its presence now meant something new. Something earned the observers join them in the central cabin. No one spoke at first. They just looked at each other, letting the reality settle eventually. One of them asked the question that had been lingering in all their minds. "Do you think we did the right thing, really?" The diplomat didn't answer immediately. They looked out the window, watching the station slowly drift in the distance. Then they turned back to the group. "Yes," they said. "Because if we hadn't tried, we would have always wondered who we could have become." Another observer smiled faintly. "It's funny. The galaxy thinks we're unpredictable because we take risks. But maybe that's our strength." "Maybe," the diplomat agreed. "Or maybe our strength is that we believe we can be better than we were yesterday." Silence settled again, gentle and reflective, not heavy like before. The shuttle began its slow descent route toward the nearest jump point. Soon they would return to Earth, carrying news of humanity's new place in the galaxy. But for now, the diplomat let themselves rest. They thought of their homeworld, the oceans, the cities, the mountain ranges, the millions of people who had dreamed of reaching the stars. They thought of the challenges waiting ahead: diplomacy, alliances, misunderstandings, growth. They thought of risks and rewards, hope and uncertainty. And through all of it, one truth remained steady. Humanity had earned the chance to choose its own future. As the shuttle angled toward the distant glow of the jump gate, the diplomat whispered softly, a promise meant as much for themselves as for their world. "We're ready." And with that, humanity's new chapter began athwart, not by ancient laws or cautious supervision, but by the people of Earth themselves, standing as equals in a vast shared galaxy, ready to face whatever came next.